Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is March 16, 2021. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the state of things now that Joe Biden is in office. The Democrats are on the back to normal mission, whether or not that's even possible, and what this means for us as socialists who very much have been pushed to the side politically. To do that, we're going to do three things in this video. I want to read first a couple of articles about countries in political collapse and coup. What does that look like? How does it feel? How does it affect your day-to-day life? Because I think that this is something we need to come to terms with in the United States. Number two, I'd like to talk a little bit about the state of the movement and a few things that I see going on out on the socialist left, and particularly the Marxist-Leninist online world. I see some not so cool stuff going on, and I think that there is a real need for content creators and the people who hang around them on a regular basis in whether it's Discord chats or Twitter or whatever, to just kind of take a deep breath and get some perspective. Some of that perspective is hopefully going to be coming from the first article. I also want to rehash what has happened in the last year, because really a lot has happened. We went from kind of Bernie Sanders in the primaries to, Trump out of office to the coronavirus. Where does that actually leave us? There's not a ton of energy, and I think that people are taking out some of their frustrations on each other. Third, I would like to talk about an area where on the political landscape, unfortunately, there is a lot more energy than we have on the socialist left, which is rad-lib or social democratic land. We are going to take a look at a couple of Kyle Kulinski videos of secular talk, analyzing current events, and talk about what's wrong with that. Finally, I think we're going to conclude on a note of there are still opportunities for the socialist left to be creating quality content, to launch a campaign of influence on the American public, on the world public. But I don't think that we're necessarily making the best of the opportunities which are in front of us. So let's start with the articles about political coup and collapse. Both of these articles are written by a writer named Indi Samarajiva, who is a writer living in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And you can find their content at patreon.com/indication. All right, so this first article is titled, "I Lived Through Collapse, America is Already There." This is from September 26, 2020. Subtitle is, "Living in Sri Lanka During the End of the Civil War, I Saw How Life Goes On, Surrounded by Death." I lived through the end of a civil war. I moved back to Sri Lanka in my 20s just as the ceasefire fell apart. Do you know what it was like for me? Quite normal. I went to work, I went out, I dated. This is what Americans don't understand. They're waiting to get personally punched in the face while ash falls from the sky. That's not how it happens. This is how it happens. Precisely what you're feeling now. The numbing litany of bad news. The ever-rising outages. People suffering, dying, and protesting all around you while you think about dinner. If you're trying to carry on while people around you die, your society is not collapsing. It's already fallen down. I was looking through some old photos for this article, and the mix is shocking to me now, almost offensive. There's a burnt body in front of my office. Then I'm playing Scrabble with friends. There's bomb smoke rising in front of the mall. Then I'm at a concert. There's a long line for gas. Then I'm at a nightclub. This is all within 2 weeks. Today, I'm like, did we live like this? But we did. I mean, I did. Was I a rich Colombo fuckboy while poorer people died, especially minorities? Yes, I wrote about it, but who cares? The real question is, who are you? I mean, you're reading this. You have the leisure to ponder American collapse like it's even a question. The people really experiencing it already know. Quick side note. I mean, I think that's a little bit of false dichotomy. America is a very info-saturated place, and it's very likely you could be reading this or listening to this and also being very much affected by it. As someone who's already experienced societal breakdown, here's the truth. America has already collapsed. What you're feeling is exactly how it feels. It's Saturday, and you're thinking about food while the world is on fire. This is normal. This is life during collapse. Collapse does not mean you're personally dying right now. It means y'all are dying right now. Death is sometimes close, sometimes far away, but always there. I used to judge those herds of gazelle when the lion eats one of them and everyone keeps going. But no, humans are just the same. That's the real meaning of herd immunity. We're fundamentally immune to giving a shit. It honestly becomes mundane for the privileged. As Columbo kids, we used to go out, worry about money, fall in love, life went on. We'd pop the trunk for a bomb check, turn off our lights for the air raids. I'm not saying that we were untouched. My friend's dad was killed, suddenly, by a landmine. R.I.P. Uncle Nahal. I know people who were beaten, arrested, and went into exile. But that's not what my photo stream looks like. It was mostly food and parties and normal stuff for a dumb 20-something. Collapse is just a series of ordinary days in between extraordinary bullshit, most of it happening to someone else. That's all it is. If you're waiting for a moment where you're like, this is it, I'm telling you, it never comes. Nobody comes on TV and says, things are officially bad. There's no launch party for decay. It's just a pileup of outrages and atrocities in between friendships and weddings and perhaps an unusual amount of alcohol. Perhaps you're waiting for some moment when the adrenaline kicks in and you're fighting the virus or fascism all the time, but it's not like that. Life is not a movie, and if it were, you're certainly not the star. You're just an extra. If something good or bad happens to you, it'll be random and no one will care. If you're unlucky, you're a statistic. If you're lucky, no one notices you at all. One day, I was at work when someone left a bomb at the No Limit clothing store. It exploded, killing 17 people. When these types of traumatic events take place, no two people experience the same thing. For me, it was seeing the phone lines getting clogged for an hour. For my wife, it was feeling the explosion a half-kilometer from her house. But for the families of the 17 victims, this was the end, and their grief goes on. As you can see, this is not a uniform experience of chaos. For some people, it destroys their bodies, others their hearts, but for most people, it's just a low-level hum at the back of their minds. What's that buzzing sound you hear now? Today, I assume you went to work. Bad news was everywhere, clogging up your social media, your conversations. Maybe it struck close to you. I'm sorry. Somewhere in your country, 1,000 people died. I'm sorry for each of them. 1,000 families are grieving tonight. 1,000 more join them every day. The pain doesn't go away. It just becomes a furniture of bones in 1,000 homes. As a nation, you don't seem to mourn your dead, but their families do. Their communities do. Jesus also weeps. But for most people, it's just another day. You've run out of coffee. There's a funny meme. This can't be collapse because nothing's collapsing for me. But that's exactly how collapse feels. This is how I felt. This is how millions of people have felt, including many immigrants in your midst. We're trying to tell you as loud as we can. You can get out of it, but you have to understand where you are to even turn around. This, I fear, is one of many things Americans do not understand. You tell yourself American collapse is impossible. Meanwhile, look around. In the last 3 months, America has lost more people than Sri Lanka lost in 30 years of civil war. If this isn't collapse, then the word has no meaning. You probably still think of Sri Lanka as a shithole, though the war ended over a decade ago and we're relatively fine. Then what does that make you? America has fallen. You need to look up at the people you're used to looking down on. We're trying to tell you something. I have lived through collapse and you're already there. Until you understand this, you only have further to fall. So that's the end of the first article. I Lived Through Collapse, America is Already There by indie.ca. And I will have more comments. Let's go to the second article first, which is along the same lines. I lived through a stupid coup. America is having one now. You've already lost. This is what Americans need to understand. This one's dated November 10, 2020. I believe both of these articles are available on Medium if you want to go look them up. And there's a note here. Note, this was written in November. On January 7, 2021, a mob attacked your capital itself. And there's a picture here. The minority party took over parliament and literally started throwing stuff. This is, somewhat reminiscent of the siege on the Capitol. All right, starting the article. 2 years ago, I lived through a coup in Sri Lanka. It was stupid. The minority party threw chili powder at everyone in parliament and took over by farce. Note there, the article says farce. I'm not sure if it's supposed to say force, but either way, it may be a little pun on force. Math, however, requires a majority, and the courts kicked them out. They gave in. We'd been protesting for weeks, and yay, we won. No. I didn't know it at the time, but we had already lost. No one knew, but oh my God, what we lost. The legitimate government came back, but it was divided and weak. We were divided and weak. We were vulnerable. 4 months later, on Easter Sunday, some assholes attacked multiple churches and hotels, killing 269 of us. My wife and kids were at church. I had to frantically call them back. Our nation was shattered. Mobs began attacking innocent Muslims. It was out of control. The coup broke our government, and 4 months later, that broke us. The coup was a farce at the time, but how soon it turned to tragedy. They called it a constitutional crisis, but how soon it became a real one. Right now, the same thing is happening to you. I'm trying to warn you, America. It seems stupid now, but the consequences are not. You are being couped. Part 1. You're being couped. What is a coup? It's literally a blow, a strike. Someone hitting your normal processes of government, trying to knock them over. The blow doesn't have to succeed. It still wounds. In our case, it was occupying Parliament without a majority. In yours, it's denying the president-elect after an election. Oh, wait, there's a note. Now you've attacked your Congress as well. Whether it fails or not, deep structural damage is done. At the time, however, it just feels dumb. Frankly, I expected more epaulettes and tanks, but this is all you get. A bunch of dumbasses throwing chili powder. Someone at Four Seasons Total Landscaping next to a dildo shop. What a fucking stupid century. This is what our coups look like. As one recovering coup victim to another, let me tell you this. The first step is simply accepting that you've been couped. This is hard, and your media or Wikipedia may never figure this out. What the fuck does constitutional crisis mean? Is murder an existential crisis? But it's nonetheless true. The U.S. system is weird, but people voted for a change of power. One person is refusing to accept the people's will. He's taking power that doesn't belong to him. That's a coup. Americans are so caught up with the idea that this can't be happening to them, that they're missing the very obvious fact that it is. What else do you call Donald Trump refusing to leave, consolidating control of the military, and spreading lies across the media? That, my friends, is just a coup. You take the power, you have the guns, and you lie about it. American commentators say, like we're the third world now, as if our very existence is a pejorative. Ha ha, you assholes, stop calling us that. You're no better than us. The third world from the sun is Earth. You live here too. America is, in fact, worse than us. America's democracy is a lightly modified enslavement system that black people only wrested universal franchise from in 1965. It's frankly a terrible democracy built on voter suppression of 94% of the population, full of racist booby traps, and prone to absurd randomness. For example, your dumbass founders left enough time to get to Washington by horse. That's 4 months, where a loser could hold power, later reduced to 2. This is a built-in coup. Think about it. Your system gives the loser all the power and guns for 2 whole months. Almost every modern democracy changes power the next day to avoid the very situation you're in. Coups happen to white people too. As Ashton Kutcher would say, "You've been couped." Part 2, you've already lost. It's absurd because the whole thing seems like a clown show. Coups are supposed to be orderly, authoritarian, not this dumb shit. It honestly seems like a grift to bilk supporters out of more money. You can just roll it back, right? Right? No. No, no, no. Oh God, no. The tragic thing which you don't understand, which you cannot understand, is that you've already lost. You cannot know exactly what. That's the nature of chaos. But know this, you will lose more than you can bear. We lost our children playing at church. We lost our friends sitting down to brunch. Muslims lost their dignity and rights. Your Republicans have set forces into play they cannot possibly understand and certainly cannot control. And they don't even want to. To them, chaos is a ladder. This is the point. You have taken an orderly system, balancing a whole lot of chaos and fucked with it. I don't know how it's going to explode, but I can promise you this, it's going to explode. This is precisely why we have elections and why both sides accept the results. To keep the chaos at bay. The whole point is that you have a regular ritual fight rather than fighting all the time. Once one side breaks ritual, then you're on your way to the Civil War. Once you break the rules, then chaos ensues. What exactly happens? I don't know. It's chaos. What I can tell you, what anyone who's experienced this can tell you, is that it's going to be bad. I didn't know that churches and hotels would blow up on Easter Sunday, but I know now. I'm trying to tell you in advance. You've opened up a Pandora's box of instability. All kinds of demons come out. I have lived through a coup. It felt like what you're feeling now. Like watching something stupid and just waiting for it to go away. But it doesn't go away. You can forget about it, but it doesn't go away. There's a ticking bomb at the heart of your democracy now. Your government, the very idea of governance, is fatally wounded. Chaos has been planted at its heart. I don't know what this chaos will grow into, but I can promise you this, it won't be good. Please understand, my wife and children were at church that day. Our regular church, where they hadn't gone, had bombs on either side. I couldn't understand the news when I first got it, and you cannot understand the fear until they were safely home. I do not want you to understand, but I fear one day you must. You have fucked with chaos, and soon chaos will fuck with you. To quote Yeats, "The falcon cannot hear the falconer, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned." I'll close with the one thing that kept my own family safe. Good luck. So, that is the end of that article. And I believe that this writer, again, patreon.com/indication, has written more on this topic. I believe that you get the point. So my comments on these articles, I did skip around a little bit. This author doesn't seem to be a socialist, and they put a little too much, how do I say this? I think that what they're saying about the Republican Party is right. I think that they didn't put nearly enough blame on the Democrats, let's put it that way. As socialists, opposed to all of capitalism, we take a more systemic look at the problems. You know, government and the political apparatus is just one institution within society. It is corrupted by capital, just like many institutions are corrupted by capital. As socialists opposing capitalism in its entirety and wanting to uproot it in its entirety, we have to look at the whole thing, not just the governmental process. That said, I think that these insights are very valuable as long as we sort of recast them in that frame. Now, all of that said, I can't agree more with this. So, I grew up in the 80s. I remember them well. I remember the 90s very well. The whole pre-9/11 era, vastly different from what we're living through now. I cite really 9/11 and the George W. Bush presidency as the real beginning of this. Yes, America has had shitty imperialist presidents for many years. That system has been creeping more and more to the right for decades. However, there are times when it gets ratcheted up. You know, there's a sort of quantum leap. All of a sudden, it takes a big jump all at once. 9/11, the Patriot Act, all of that stuff was a massive step forward for the police state. 2008 was a massive step forward for austerity becoming the new normal. Trump and the Tea Party were a massive step forward for a proto-fascist movement that was always there. There were always what they called the super patriots or the hyper patriots. This sort of the Constitution Party has overlap with the libertarians and these kind of like extreme right-winger people who, despite what some on the left will tell you, we as socialists have absolutely nothing in common with. Whereas we want socialism, they call everything happening now that is actually consequences of capitalism, they call it socialism, and they hate socialism with a passion. Anything they don't understand is socialism, and believe me, they don't understand a lot. That's the chaos that people like the Koch brothers are counting on to keep their fortunes. When the U.S. armed forces go into a country and they destabilize the country militarily, often after long periods of sanctions and debt traps and economic warfare, when they destabilize it militarily, well, look at what there was in Iraq. There was widespread fighting, violence, chaos, explosions, and then a green zone where the sanctioned few, sanctioned in a good way, that is, the approved few, the chosen few, could go in the green zone and, you know, live more comfortably. It's like gated community on a larger scale. I'm not an expert on the subject, so I'm going to leave it at that. But you'd always hear these green zones, and then it was like, you know, amidst, it's like, you know, in The Walking Dead or World War Z or something. It's like the walled city within just this chaos that they have unleashed, where the outside world has become unlivable, you know, inhospitable to a point that is just, you know, extremely rough going for anyone stuck outside the walls. Well, to hyper-capitalists who would literally, you know, probably rather nuke the planet than give up capital, that's perfectly acceptable to them. And they are willing to release the tides of ignorance and hate that their right-wing propaganda and Cold War propaganda has been fomenting for decades in this reactionary cesspool of the United States. All of these right-wing extremists and just a generally right-wing culture that has been fomented for decades and decades. This is why our socialist movement is so small. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that. This is anyone who's gotten involved with the socialist movement at all. One of your first questions is, why is it so fucking tiny? What is the deal? And massive, massive repression amid petty bourgeoisie, middle class that has been bought off by the capitalists against the working class and against the idea of a working class taking power for ourselves. They're taught to fear it, and they're just all screwed up. All screwed up, confused, false consciousness, whatever you want to call it. The end result is mass confusion and chaos. Now, we're 40 years into neoliberalism, started a bout with Reagan, maybe late 70s. And we're now here. 20 years ago was 9/11 and the introduction of a real police surveillance state. And with all of the surplus military gear being sold to local and county police departments because of, quote, anti-terrorism, you know, because there's just terrorists waiting to strike at the heart of rural South Dakota. But they sell them fucking tanks. Yeah, part of it's to line the pockets of the weapons and military gear producers. But it's also there to be used against you and me, in case we ever start thinking, hey, maybe I'd like to get this boot off my neck and stand up to Capitol. People want change in this country, but we're terrified to go for it. And people have formed all kinds of defense mechanisms against it, mocking people, activists who stand up for something better. People are really afraid to admit how afraid they are and how despairing they are. So I wanted to start this video off with a discussion of let's accept this is a really fucking bad situation. It used to be in the 70s, getting on an airplane was like riding a bus. You buy a ticket, you just go like let yourself onto the plane, at least in some places. It was, for all the problems that were happening, the atmosphere was, generally speaking, an easier one. People were not getting mowed down in schools every other day. The breakdown had just not gone that far. There were other problems, but massive, widespread austerity wasn't one of them. Yes, middle-class living standards were not everywhere. There was still an underclass, oftentimes with racial components to who was consigned to that underclass. But there was still this idea that there was some protection, there was a framework you could work within. All of that started going out the window after the conservative counter-revolution of the 70s was launched into the political reality of the 80s and the 90s, and then the war on terror, and then the post-2008 era, and now neo-fascism is knocking at the door. It's here. And like this author says, it's mundane, it's banal, it's fucking stupid. It's a MAGA hat wearing, petty bourgeois, self-interested, ignorant, hateful moron. And there are tens of millions of them. It's here, and 2022 is right around the corner. And you have a Democratic Party that has been complicit with this the whole time. Bill Clinton, bought off by the Koch brothers back in the 90s, or I don't know when they got to him, but they might have gotten to him in the late 80s. You have two political parties that don't work for workers at all. They both serve capital explicitly, and that's not enough. Because people like you and me, socialists, exist, and we're threatening to use the internet to organize and educate workers, they want to release the hounds on us to make sure that we never get a leg up. This is the reality we're in. For me, I accepted that with 9/11 in the mid-2000s, when I started digesting that, really bad shit was coming. And I tried to convince whoever I could, and I worked with other people on that. Ironically, many libertarians got involved in that movement because they tried to make it, oh, government bad. No, no, no. There's a class component to this. It's not just government bad. This is a right-wing coup for more empire, et cetera, et cetera. But that's libertarians for you. They want a cure that's worse than the disease. In fact, they're driving it. This is why the whole left-right alliance horseshoe theory is bullshit. And if you hear socialist commentators promoting horseshoe theory, tell them to call them on their shit. Horseshoe theory isn't real, okay? It's not real. So going back to then, in the mid-2000s, going, wow, this is a whole new world. They're using 9/11 as a pretext to do whatever they want. Nobody listened, or few people listened. Maybe, I don't know, 1 in 4 people listened. And then you had the economic collapse. Everybody talked about that. Obama and Biden to the rescue in the 2010s. It got us nowhere. We got Trump anyway. Now they put Biden back in. What do you think's coming next? Again, those articles being about how coups don't have to be overtly successful to still cause wounds, sometimes mortal wounds. Now, all that rhetoric about, bourgeois democracy and this and that, I'm a socialist, you're a socialist. Obviously, we can take that part with a grain of salt and account for that. But the basic premise remains true. The ruling class is heading towards a new consensus. They want to move beyond liberal democracy entirely. They're threatened by the prospect of a working class that can access all the information that we can and can communicate as freely as we can. And they want to get ahead of it. One of the ways they're doing that is with this neo-fascist push, which I think has not assumed final form yet. Donald Trump was a lightning rod for it. But what will be its final form? I mean, I think really much like the end of Ghostbusters, where you get the stupidest possible monster, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Sorry, spoiler alert. It's still knocking down buildings, though, even though it's goofy. You got the same thing. And I think that that was the point. Smack yourself in the face, take a cold shower, accept it. We're into some bad shit. Now, this moves us on to part 2, which is what's going on now. Where's the energy? Okay, Socialism for All. I started this channel last February, 2020. We were in the Democratic primaries. Bernie Sanders had won the first 3. Why do I bring up Bernie Sanders? Well, I was just talking about despair and fear and all of that is keeping people who really want change. 70% of Americans want Medicare for all, for example. That's something that as socialists, we can support that policy. That means that Americans have caught up with us. The masses, at least on that issue, have caught up with us. That's tremendous. But do 70% of politicians want it? No, of course not. Of course not. No one in politics wants it. They all serve capital. So you had Bernie Sanders there. What was Bernie Sanders doing, and why did I support Bernie Sanders, knowing that there would be potential problems? Well, let's go back to 2015. We had fake progressive Obama get in and do his bullshit for 8 years. Was it possible that Bernie Sanders could come in and do actually progressive things that actually could maybe have a thaw of the chilling effect that we had witnessed, for example, with the George W. Bush police state and empire initiatives? Was it possible that we could start to fight back against neoliberal austerity and reawaken the American worker to the possibility of fighting in our own interest, to some glimmer of class consciousness returning? Well, I saw some of that happening. I saw it from, I was working a retail job at the time where I got to chat often with customers. And I heard people saying it. It was a little bit of a renaissance and a reawakening of like, hey, wow, possibilities, which you just hadn't seen in a long time because there hadn't been politicians that came along on a major platform and said these things. What was Bernie's flaw? Well, I said it at the time. I've said it before on the show. Okay, he got cheated and whatever, fine. But he then became complicit in that theft in 2016 when he endorsed Hillary and then shut up about the cheating. What he needed to do, and this is my opinion, and I will probably go to my grave saying this someday, hopefully far in the future, you hold a press conference where you endorse Hillary Clinton, and at the same press conference, you say, also, we are sitting out this election, but as of today, I am forming a Labor Party for the United States, or alternatively, I am joining the Green Party, who already play by the rules that my campaign laid down, which is no billionaire money, no PAC money, which is the fundamental thing corrupting American politics right now. And we're sitting out 2016, but we're going to be back in 2018 and 2020, and we will slay, we're going to blow out both of these two parties that are owned by capital. He could have done that. He needed to do that. He didn't do it, and I was like, yeah, I don't know about this. Funneling that back into the Democratic Party was fatal. Yet, in 2019 and 2020, he ran again, tried to use the front door again like a sucker, and he still got people coming out in droves, just like Trump did, filling stadiums. Now, was Bernie Sanders the new Vladimir Lenin? No. He was much more of a middle of the road. I think there were people in the coalition who were socialists. There were also people further to the right who were social democrats in the Bernie coalition. But because of the lack of money in the campaign, it was a campaign Marxists could, and as I urged, should support. Because again, you're getting workers to shed the despair, to shed the hopelessness, to shed the terror that had been instilled in them by decades of neoliberalism, the hopelessness, the cynicism that was just beaten into their heads in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s. The false hope that Obama sold, the outright terror that Bush and Cheney sold, the Bush and Reagan years, I skipped over Clinton, the globalization and the defeat, apparent defeat of socialism in the 90s, the Bush and Reagan years in the 80s and early 90s of new morning in America, more like midnight in America. That had been beat into people's heads over like 35 years by 2015. And you were getting people to come back out. You were getting people to say, if timidly at first, yeah, we can do this. And it did last into 2020. But again, like I said, Bernie, like a sucker, tries to use the front door. He falls for the same fucking thing over again. You know, I think at this point, Bernie's probably just in on it. But here's the deal. We need that moment again. People willing to come out by the stadium full and stand up against capital for real in a united, class-based, mass economic demand type of movement that is also connected with anti-racist and anti-heterosexist and anti-sexist struggles, because all of those are interwoven oppressions that they're why capital is so resilient in the United States, because all those systems were painstakingly woven together by the founders, by capital over the decades and centuries to make sure that their system would last. It's why it's like so fucking durable, is because it's not just capitalism. They wove racism and genocide and deep sexism into the mix. Unless we get at all of them at once, you're not going to get any one of them. And the people who designed these oppressions made sure of that through, you know, trial and error social engineering over the years. And by the way, that kind of social engineering, it's not that hard to do. You just figure out the wrong thing and you do it. And they did, and they had the power to do it, and they did it. For example, when women started entering the workforce more, they gave the women entering jobs that previously had been done by men that maybe, for example, used to be you could start as a man, you could start it in a bank as a bank teller and literally work your way up to president. Like you got promoted. Well, okay, we'll let women in the workforce as employees of the bank, and we'll make bank teller a dead-end job. There you go. You're working here, but the nature of the job has changed. So they just did this over and over again until they had a system that had co-opted and expanded, you know, more and more, had brought more people into the fold of capital, but they'd maintained the oppression, and they had built-in safeguards against people uniting and being empowered by it. So that's where we are today. Yet we had a movement in Bernie Sanders, as flawed as it was, that was getting people to come out from the despair, the hate, the negativity, and stand up. And then it was all gone because Bernie rolled over for Joe. By April, it was all over. I think, you know, what was it, April 14th, I think it was? I'll bet that's right. It's kind of etched in my mind. Could be wrong. It was around then anyway. and we did videos about it. It was like, Bernie's getting awful quiet. And then, the excuse was the pandemic. Oh, it's not safe to vote. Okay, yeah, it wasn't safe to vote, but they didn't call off the election. Biden just won by default. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Bernie Sanders, fuck Bernie Sanders for what he did. Regardless, though, there's a lesson there to be learned by us as socialists, which is that kind of lightning rod moment was powerfully important. And that wasn't that long ago. That was literally less than a year ago. I mean, that was 11 months ago, as of when I'm recording this, that Bernie endorsed Biden. People lost a lot of hope all over again, although, they had seen it twice in 2019, 2020, and in 2015, 2016. We saw how many people actually want big economic-based change. They want capital to be at least reined in. We as socialists want it to be abolished. That's our argument to be made once we get into that coalition and get that stage. I mean, we're doing it now on YouTube channels and meme pages and whatever, however we're doing it. But taking it to the masses, that's another level. The Bernie Sanders campaign was, as flawed as it was, a platform for doing that. Yes, you had to bump elbows with a lot of social democrats and rad libs, but we still had a place, even if we had to share it with others. That was kind of a first in a long fucking time. And we need it again, because right now, where are we? We're in a valley. We're in a trough. We're in a rut. Let's face it, we're in a rut. The right wing reflecting capital, generally speaking, they're on the verge of abandoning liberal democracy, abandoning it. They are creating this mass movement of MAGA that is really threatening to kind of take on a life of its own. It's that chaos that can't be contained once it takes on a life of its own. They're about ready to say, yeah, what do we even need to pretend we're democracy for? They're an inch away from that. I take that danger actually very seriously. The Democrats are complicit in it, but the average foot soldier Democrat, yes, there's blue MAGA. It's a little different, though. It's harmful in its own way. It's just not one-to-one equivalent, I think, with the red MAGA. Point is, both parties have moved super far right, and it seems like the capitalist class is at a consensus now of who needs to even pretend we have democracy? Okay, well, that leaves us. I've seen a lot in the movement of people just not knowing exactly where to go. I'm a small channel content creator here. We just this weekend crossed the 2,000 subscriber mark. Thanks to everyone who did sub to the channel. That's awesome. Love to see that growth. We do mostly Marxist audiobooks on the channel. I'm happy to see that kind of interest in that kind of content because we do need general education. And that's more the direction I'm going with, on the channel here. Marxist unity, non-denominational Marxism. I think that's about as broad of a left unity you can really pull off practically. That's tremendous to see. But the fact is, we're small. In a movement like that, I mean, even if every subscriber that I had came out, we would be less than a tenth, for example, of a 30,000 head capacity stadium. This isn't the Bernie movement. Yet we need to recreate that movement that Bernie failed to do. Like I said, my plan would have been same day you endorse Hillary, you say, I'm forming a new party. I want all of you to join and we're going to sweep 2018 and 2020. He didn't do that. But I can't just get up there and say, hey, we're starting a Labor Party. And neither can any of the other under 5,000 or maybe under 50,000, content creators, maybe under 500,000, maybe under 1 million. You just can't do it. There's not enough, really committed people in the audience for something like that. What we get on the left is a bunch of little cults or gangs. Street gangs is how small left groups often behave. I've been involved in some of them. It's a huge turnoff. I didn't want to be part of it because what do? You spend your energy infighting. That doesn't help anyone. And then you have clout chasers. And there's a lot of this going on right now. Look, the movement is in a rut. Face it, accept it, take a breath, take a pause. Use this time to do some reading, to do some organizing. Because beating up on other people in the movement needlessly for clout to get your numbers up, it's not good for anybody. And some of the people I've seen involved in this are going to wind up dead of a heart attack from the vigor, with which they get themselves whipped up and are going after other people. I don't know how some of these people fall asleep at night. It's so anxiety provoking just to listen to the amount of tension that people will go after each other with. I think that there are some real things worth criticizing in the movement. I also think that you can criticize them without devolving into gang warfare. And I think that calling out that type of behavior, calling out those who do engage in that, that's a problem in and of itself, no matter which sub-ideology you represent. Don't engage in that fucking behavior. Don't do it. It's bad for everyone. It stresses you out. It stresses out your audience. It's a needless source of conflict and tension. It's uncomradely. It's not good. It's just polluting the environment. It's just making it harder. Now, in any group, you have to draw boundaries around the edges. Make it clear what's in and what's out. For example, my last video, I attacked Vosh. But I didn't just wantonly attack him. I attacked him on substance, and it is what it is. He has a huge audience, 200,000 subs. It's probably up to 210 now. We need to siphon those people off. But, do it through persuasion, not just acting like we're in a gangster movie. That's not really appealing. I mean, maybe it is if you're a content creator who has a huge ego and is just trying to feed that. But A, you're going to burn out real fast, and B, you're just going to attract other shitheads who have a huge chip on their shoulder. That's not actually great for the movement. One of our big problems right now, I was talking before about how many people want real change in this country. Lots. The problem when we go out, for example, last year there was huge uprisings all over the country. I was talking with another content creator recently who was expressing the opinion that the left hadn't done enough in terms of agitating during the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter uprisings to turn it into more of a sustained thing. And, my opinion on that was, I think we did as much as we could. We just don't really have the numbers. And we've kind of got to accept that. We need more, moments of the national lightning rod, national mass movement effect. Bernie came along, and I do think we made the most of that both times. I do think that we made the most of the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of trying to explain to people how it's not just racism. All of this is tied to capitalism and class also. It's never going to be complete all in one fell swoop. You chip away at it each time. You try to raise class consciousness each time. But we're just few in numbers here. And rather than attacking each other unduly, I mean, there is a certain amount of quality control that does need to go on. People should engage in discourse with each other and, confront the ideas and confront the behaviors where that is relevant. But just bashing on people gleefully for clout, that's really not it. And all you're doing is making it really more difficult for people to engage with the entire, the material at any level. You're making it harder for people to get into the community. You're making it harder to sustain an environment that doesn't just devolve into internal chaos and violence. That's what we're looking to avoid here, is, do quality control so that we have people who are held to some kind of standards for their behavior and their ideas without random viciousness, or just factional viciousness that serves no other purpose other than promoting a faction. Because really at that point, your interests have diverged from the mass movement. I think what we got to do is we got to get the masses to catch up with us. there is, I think, a big disconnect between the U.S. left and the U.S. masses. I actually don't put that so much on the U.S. left, though. I would put it more on the masses, not on a personal level, but I would just say the U.S. masses are subjected to an educational curriculum and a culture that really seeks to deaden their class consciousness. We don't have a mass union movement. People just aren't brought up with that being part of their lives so much compared to some other countries and compared to just even the past in the United States. There's less of it here right now than there has been really maybe since, the IWW or something broke out in 1905. I mean, really this may be like a real low point for class consciousness. I think it is on the upswing again, partly because the contradictions are so heightened and conditions are so bad that it is forcing it. But it is causing, I think, also a lot of alienation. There's a lot of terminally online people who, yes, because of their alienation, they are, and this may include you, some of you in the audience, is you're very alienated from, real life activities. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. And so you're online. And so also anti-capitalist messages of Marxism and alienation and exploitation, they resonate with you because you feel very exploited and alienated. Yet there's a little bit of a paradox in that all that alienation and exploitation that we're feeling, which makes us receptive to these messages in the first place, also has engendered a lot of hostility in us. And we've got to learn to work together without taking that out on each other and engaging in toxic behavior. I hope that makes sense. That is more or less my point there. So we're in a lull. We're in a rut. Biden took office a few months ago. Obviously, nothing's going to change. And we're all kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, which is for the right wing to regroup and then attempt another coup of some kind. Another blow against rational thought, another blow against the concept of having, elections. There's a lot of problems there. I don't think the U.S. has real elections, but the concept that democracy is even a good thing. I mean, whether bourgeois or proletarian democracy, but just the concept in general, that it's just like, hey, why don't we just embrace open, naked fascism? It's on the doorstep, I'm telling you. So I know that we're in this holding pattern right now. So what do? If you're listening to this, if you're another content creator, I know you're motivated. I know you're motivated enough to spend your time listening to me talk, to get educated about Marxism, to learn the history of socialism, to feel inspired by struggles in other countries that have been more successful than the United States struggle for socialism. I know that you're motivated enough to hang up flyers and join a fringe political group and to do these things and to get involved in whatever ways that you are involved. First of all, I recognize and I applaud all of you for that. No matter what sins you have committed, we all have something where we have acted uncomradely. But we've got to start putting that behind us and work together more constructively, even in bad times like these are. Even when we're waiting for that next lightning rod moment, we can't give in to the impatience. We can't give in to the fear that it's never going to come, because that's when we start lashing out. That's when we start acting uncomradely. That's when we make it about us. That's when we make it about our faction. That's when emotions get the better of us and we start acting in ways that are destructive to the movement. The situation out there is not good. We don't have the energy. It sucks. Let us, though, recognize that the problem is the Koch brothers. The problem is the Waltons. The problem is many other faceless capitalists, even wealthier, who control huge amounts of political and economic power. That's the problem. It's a lot bigger than whatever gang squabble you're in on some Discord server. That's not the problem. If you're on these online platforms, whether it's Twitter or Discord or whatever it is, Reddit, and you're spending vast amounts of your life engaging in these like factional fights. I know you like that it's like stimulating your limbic center and you're getting some adrenaline out of it. But our problems are a lot bigger than that, and you've got to refocus. That is dragging you down. That's what I'm here to tell you right now. That's not helpful. So I'm going to segue out of this now, and we're going to go into part 3. I hope that that's clear. Please leave any comments or questions below, because I know that I've just opened a really ugly subject that people either want to, I think, ignore or accept as normal, or they're really invested in the drama. Well, show me your thoughts below. So who does have the energy? Well, going back to Bernie Sanders, he took all the energy that we gave him at the rallies and in the donations and the phone calls and everything else, and he funneled it right into the Democratic Party. I wish I had a little flushing sound effect right now, because that's what happened. It went down into the septic tank where the Democratic Party keeps its left wing. So functionally, what is this? It's the squad. It's Bernie Sanders. Well, honestly, that's about it. It's pretty small. Let's take a look at a couple of Kyle Kulinski videos. I know. Not because I'm trying to promote Kyle Kulinski. We're going to actually critique it. I don't think he's one of the worst. He is anti-socialist. He has made this point very explicitly that he is a social democrat and will speak against socialism because of free speech and stuff like that, like really bad reasons. But that dude's got almost 1 million subs. Just like Jimmy Dore, they're around 900,000, something like that. There's energy there. There's real energy there. There's a lot of listeners. There's a lot of engagement. Things that, even a Vosh, Radlib, who is far ahead of pretty much any of us. I'm not really sure, but I think even the big channels like Finnish Bolshevik or Hakeem are around 75,000, something like that, maybe 100,000 tops. We're talking about 9 or 10 times more even than that over in social democrat land. And granted, not everyone who subs to somebody like a Kyle agrees with him necessarily, but there's energy there. There's engagement. He is undoubtedly a leading voice of the movement that considers itself against neoliberalism. Was a Bernie supporter, was, again, like I said, we were in the left wing of the Bernie coalition. He's more in the center to center right wing of the Bernie coalition. Is anti-socialist. Okay, noted. But again, there's energy. And I'm going to play a video now talking about, I think this is from like a week and a half ago, talking about the Democrats failing to pass the $15 minimum wage that they promised, that even Joe Biden's on board with that. And then they let people in their own party block it without consequences, as far as I'm aware. And the answer always comes down to, we just need better Democrats. Well, here's an opportunity for us as socialists to engage with the mainstream, to engage with the masses, and say, hey, just getting better Democrats is not a realistic strategy for a number of reasons. So let's listen to the clip, and then we'll reflect and comment.
So we have some pretty big news coming out of Washington, D.C. The $1.9 trillion COVID relief package has passed the Senate. Robert Reich laid out what's in it. We have $1,400 per person, one-time stimulus checks, $300 a month unemployment.
I don't know if that is a typo, $300 a month unemployment. Is it $300 a week unemployment? Because $300 a month is not a lot. I probably don't need to tell you. Also, I'd just like to point out here, nothing the Democrats are doing is progressive in the sense that it is intended merely to just advance the economic system further all of it's reactive. All of it is reacting to damage that has already occurred, whether from the pandemic or whatever. They're just trying to clean up after it to get back to, quote, normal before that particular disaster started. None of it is progressive in the sense of like forward thinking down the line. None of it is socialistic in the sense, where we see that capitalism, you can just predict it's going to have the boom and bust cycle. It's going to create more disasters eventually. Therefore, we need to move away from this system. All of this is spot cleaning, more or less.
Here's the quiet part that not many people talked about, but it's actually a huge deal. $3,000 per child tax credit, which is huge. That's supposed to, according to some analysis, that's supposed to cut child poverty in the U.S. in half.
So I have not seen that analysis that he's referring to. I'm not sure which analysis it is. I don't see how that's remotely possible, that $3,000 per child is going to cut child poverty in half. Unless they're using like a weasel measure, like technically the family is living like just under the technical poverty level, and it will put them like $1 over the poverty level or something like that. Otherwise, that is highly suspicious in my opinion. If you know of that analysis, please share it in the comments.
There's also rent assistance, help for small businesses. The federal government bailed out some states that had to, that didn't have much money to deal with the COVID pandemic. They basically dipped into their rainy day funds, and states were on the brink of bankruptcy, and the federal government is now stepping in and effectively bailing out a lot of these states. Republicans are trying to portray this in partisan terms and say like, oh, it's the bailout of the blue states or whatever. I mean, that's utter nonsense. And beyond that, a lot of the money going there is actually to shore up pensions. So over 1 million people are having their pensions saved as a result of this package. And I mean, it would be pennies on the dollar for the pensions if they didn't pass this $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. So listen, without a doubt, there are positive parts of this COVID relief package, and we are much better off having it passed than if it didn't pass. So I just want to leave no doubt in your mind about that. And if you don't believe me, go talk to one of those over 1 million people who just had their pension saved by this. Go talk to the people. $3,000 per child tax credit is colossal. $1,400 stimulus check per person, $300 a month unemployment insurance, help for small businesses, rent assistance, so on and so forth. So definitely positive parts of it.
Okay. I'm not sure where he's about to go with this, but I'll say it again. What the Democrats are doing is mostly reactive. We had a disaster. Let's clean up after it. It's not really about getting to a new system. And in fact, their party vehemently, viciously, with everything they've got, tooth and nail, will fight against anything further left about making more fundamental changes to the economy. They absolutely oppose that with everything that they've got. Therefore, is it better to have a $3,000? I'm not actually even sure. From the articles I read about that, it seems like just for 1 year, the $3,000 tax credit per child. I mean, it's better to have that than not. I got COVID assistance last year. No doubt, like, it's better to have it than not. But this is also a party that is fighting with everything that it has more fundamental reforms. This is where we differ from a social democrat who, again, is going to applaud this stuff. And I believe he's just going to go on to criticize not passing the $15 minimum wage. There are bigger issues here, which, again, people like a Kyle Kulinski, when Bernie was in the race, following Bernie's lead, he was, quicker to criticize, to take on that bigger picture look at it. Like, well, we could do more. You hear how quickly they will settle. And the settling, it's not necessarily overt and it's not necessarily final. But you hear the contentment with getting those things. Don't be content with that. Don't be content. Because again, it's a crumb being given to you by the same people who are punching you in the face when you try to take the whole loaf. That is yours. You baked it.
But of course, you can't have the conversation about this deal without bringing up what's not in it. So first and foremost, the big ticket item that was left out is there is no $2,000 check. The Democrats did the weaselly move of campaigning on $2,000 checks, saying it's going to go out, quote, immediately. And then as soon as they got power, it changed to, oh, we meant another 1,400 because 600 already passed. So it's a total of 2,000. Incredibly weaselly. And then, of course, it went from immediately going to go out the door to, you know, whenever we can get around to it. And now is when they got around to it. So that, I mean, even though this bill is good and has a lot of positive things in it, you can't say you're going to do X and then not do X because people remember that and people keep track of that. And that pisses people off. Rightly so, as it should. But perhaps the even bigger betrayal is, of course, on the $15 minimum wage.
Let me just jump in here. Again, in and of itself, sound reasoning, sound points. The Democrats did, on fucking billboards, promise $2,000, which they then found a way to weasel out of. That is weaselly. And they didn't pass the $15 minimum wage. Indeed. These are crumbs. What about Medicare for all? Are we going to... I just, again, it becomes... And I know that Kyle Kulinski is on board with Medicare for all, but you got to mention it every time because it becomes a lie of omission. This is what the Democrats want, in other words. What I'm trying to get at here is... I keep like reframing this. What the Democrats want is they want you to forget. They want you to focus on, is it 14 or is it 2000? Because then you are literally arguing and focusing on and about the size of a crumb. Does the crumb weigh 1.4 milligrams or does it weigh 2 milligrams? You promised us a 2 milligram crumb, goddammit. They want you to think about that. They want you to forget about the big picture. They want you to forget about what's possible. And it goes way beyond a $15 minimum wage that, yes, they held out like a carrot and people like suckers believed Joe Biden was going to go for it. Look at their track record. They're not going to do it. And they didn't do it. They found a way to weasel out of it like they do with every carrot they dangle. Medicare for all is another carrot, although that one, they're never actually even allowed to get as close as they did on the $15 minimum wage. They can only dangle Medicare for all as a possible bonus prize. If you get involved and we push Biden left, then we can talk about it. And the AOCs and the further left, you know, the Bernie Sanders, they are allowed to use Medicare for all as a carrot to get people to vote for Joe Biden. But once he's in, you're not even allowed to talk about it. You are allowed to talk about the weight of the crumb. You're not allowed to think any bigger than that. So it bears mentioning that this is part of the strategy. And then people such as Mr. Kulinski, who, you know, I mean, he's an okay thinker, I think. I don't agree with his politics. He's not the worst of the worst. But by so closely just following the political game of Democrat and Republican and not being anti-capitalist, you're losing the big picture, and therefore you can't really get the meaning of what's going on. All right, back to the video.
So let me show you what happened on that front. They pulled it from the bill, and then Bernie said, I'm effectively going to force the vote on the $15 minimum wage by bringing it back up as an amendment, which puts everybody on the record. So this is really a vote on whether or not to overrule the parliamentarian. 8 Democrats voted against the $15 minimum wage. And this is who they are, and this is their net worth. Chris Coons of Delaware, who's Biden's BFF, by the way, he's worth about $10 million. Angus King of Maine, also worth about $10 million. Joe Manchin of West Virginia, worth about $7.5 million. Tom Carpenter of Delaware, worth about $6 million. Gene Shaheen of New Hampshire, worth about $4 million. John Tester of Montana, worth about $3.5 or $4 million. Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, worth about $3.5 million. And Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, we don't know how much she's worth, but let's just say I'm sure she's not living on minimum wage. And here's Kyrsten Sinema's reaction when she was voting on the $15 minimum wage. This, of course, went viral for obvious reasons. She does a cute little, oh, look at that, a little thumbs down, copying John McCain when John McCain saved Obamacare at the last minute to snub Trump and, was it Trump? To snub some Republicans, right? She's copying that famous John McCain moment, doing a little curtsy as she does the thumbs down. Now, think about what we're witnessing here. This is a Democrat putting her middle finger up to the over 1 million Americans who would be lifted out of poverty with a $15 minimum wage. That's what she's doing. The $15 minimum wage would help so many people. So many people. And she's casually, nonchalantly, flippantly doing a cutesy little hee-hee-hee, tee-hee-hee, I'm pro-wage slavery, tee-hee-hee, thumbs down. Go work full-time and don't make enough money to survive. Tee-hee-hee.
Okay, decent points, although correction on a term. Wage slavery is what anti-capitalists refer to as, capitalism generally is wage slavery. In chattel slavery, the worker was owned as property. In wage slavery, you still don't really have freedom because you don't have free access to the means of production by which to make your living. So we say that it is a new form of slavery. That's why we're socialists. Anyway, it's not just poverty wages. That's not the same. Wage slavery and poverty wages are not synonyms. But also, there's a bigger thing here. The implication, yes, what Kyrsten Sinema did there is appalling, disgusting, reprehensible. Also, do you think that this party that she's in can be reformed when she's the kind of thing that it produces and attracts and gets voted in by voters? Do you think that that party can be reformed? I say no. And that's a lot of where we're going to go in this video with Kyle is, I get it. Third parties are hard. I have more thoughts on that. I think it's not just as simple as let's all vote for them. I think it needs to be in conjunction with, again, those lightning rod events I was talking about. But thinking you can reform this party and elect better Democrats, end of story, which I don't think I'm being unfair in characterizing the social democratic, like Kyle Kulinski point of view as that. I think it more or less stops at that. You got another thing coming. There are many reasons for that. Mainly, money just controls the system. So how are you going to do that? Anyway, let's get back to the video.
So, correctly, everybody is going after her aggressively. So listen, I just wanted to add my 2 cents in this conversation. In my opinion, every single one of those Democrats that voted against the $15 minimum wage, they should never be able to live that down. Anytime any of them tweet anything, they should be ratioed to high heaven, and it should say, you voted against the $15 minimum wage, you're pathetic. And, perhaps the grossest part of this conversation and this fiasco is that virtually every single one of the 8 Democrats that voted against the $15 minimum wage here, they had tweeted support for raising the minimum wage. Some of them tweeted support for $15 an hour. But virtually all of them said at one point or another that they're in favor of raising the wage, and then they do this. So
it's not surprising. None of that is surprising. We did a video on this channel last spring, about a year ago, Same thing on Medicare for All. Looking at how the co-sponsors of the Medicare for All bill, none of them were talking about supporting it. Bernie Sanders was the only one who had consistently been a messenger in support of it. And all the other ones, Kamala Harris and a bunch of other people whose names I forget, they had co-sponsored the bill so that they could say, I co-sponsored Medicare for All. How could you say I don't support it? But it was lip service because they never did anything ever again to do activism for it, to use their position and influence to do it. So $15 minimum wage, which, by the way, is not enough. I mean, eventually we want to do away with wage labor entirely and that entire system. But 15 in this system, I mean, you're talking about, again, it's like the debating the size of the crumb metaphor. It's debating how many people we're going to let onto the life raft. And it's like by the time you're even done with that conversation, the water has risen again and everybody's drowned anyway. That's not a perfect metaphor. But you get what I'm saying. It's like, you know, the Green Party ran on $20 an hour minimum wage. That actually is a little more realistic for right now to be able to like have some semblance of a middle class life, or, you know, the good living standard. I know middle class is not a real thing. There's the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and then a very small petty bourgeoisie. Okay, fine. But what I'm saying is this ideal of being a working person and having a good standard of living. That is what I mean when I sloppily say middle class sometimes, because people in the U.S. understand that phrase. For right now, I'm college educated. I have a graduate degree. Buying a house, can't do it. Can't do it because, you know, the houses that my parents and my friends' parents bought in the 90s for $100,000 or $150,000, some places maybe $60,000, $90,000, today cost $400,000 to $500,000. Exact same house and 30 years older, but it's $500,000 fucking dollars. You can't buy that when you're making $30,000 or $40,000 a year. You can't. So, I mean, you go back just on a brief housing tangent, you go back to the 2000s and the housing bubble. Well, what was it? It was building, you know, lavish houses, and then banks giving people mortgages, working people mortgages, that were their only ticket to buying these houses. Nobody had cash for, you know, the $300,000 house or whatever they were selling it for. And then the bank would give them a mortgage that they knew they couldn't pay. The people couldn't pay it. And then the bank got the house and the money that had been paid in so far. So that was the housing bubble, was giving people mortgages that they knew, the bank knew that they wouldn't be able to pay back. I mean, there are data on how much money you need to make to be able to afford, you know, X amount of monthly payment. And they were just knowingly, wantonly exceeding that so that they could get into this whole deal where they would just, you know, the person wouldn't wind up with the house. The person would wind up getting foreclosed on because they can't pay the mortgage, as the bank very well knew. Well, now what's the deal? The houses are still unaffordably expensive, but because of 2008, the government has set down restrictions on, you know, the kind of mortgages that banks can issue. There are more restrictions now. You have to actually, you know, show higher levels of income and all that. Well, what's the problem? Getting the higher level of income. It's the house is just unaffordable. The price is too fucking high. Or the pay is too fucking low, whatever. Like the house price has tripled or quadrupled. Pay has not tripled or quadrupled. That's the fucking problem. And if we want to take that example of the houses in the 90s, when minimum wage was like $5.50 or something, it was like $5. Well, quadruple it. $20 an hour. It's not 15, it's 20. Anyway. But that's the, you know, the price of things. That's the rising tide, the water level I was talking about. And none of this really effectively addresses that point. Okay. housing tangent over. Coming back around, what's the main point? Democrats lie. Sorry, Kyle. Democrats lie. To many of us who are to your left, that is not surprising. Democrats lie. We don't believe them. Organizations like DSA, who do some good non-electoral work. I would love to be able to say to people, hey, go join DSA. There's probably one near you, because they are kind of everywhere. I won't do that because they endorse Democrats. That is a litmus test and a dividing line for me. I will not endorse an org that endorses Democrats. It's that simple. That's why I often steer people towards the Green Party. For all of their flaws, they don't endorse Democrats. It's just, and they also do some good non-electoral work. We need more of that and less of these fucking Democratic front groups. So Kyle's putting on a big show here about, these hypocritical Democrats. Yeah, hello, McFly. A lot of us got the memo a long time ago. The only reason I even remotely considered voting Democrat was because of Bernie Sanders, just because he represented a significant break from the status quo. Now, it turned out he was a faker too. That's unfortunate, to say the least, because it was a huge betrayal. Huge. He promised people something we hadn't seen in decades and then failed to deliver. That, to me, is a far worse betrayal than any of these people out of whom you expected really nothing at all, because they didn't do anything differently to start. Why wouldn't they just lie like they always do? Now, Kyle is going to get into his strategies. And by the way, there's something I've learned about Kyle Kulinski videos specifically. About the first half is decent information, and literally on almost every video, the second half, Kyle just starts talking and literally adds no new information. So we'll be stopping about halfway through. But let's let him reach his conclusion about halfway through the video.
In other words, guys, they're just liars. They're just liars. And it's worse than that. They're not just liars, actually. They're liars and they're corrupt. Because the fact of the matter is, most of these Democrats who are against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it's not, some ideological position that they sat down and combed through the evidence and determined this is the best thing for the country moving forward. No! They take a tremendous amount of money from the same corporations that don't want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So really, they're doing the bidding of their donors and the special interests. That's why they're doing what they're doing. So they lied to you and said they supported it when they didn't. And there should be consequences for that. There should absolutely be consequences for that. I think that everybody should call their offices and leave a message and tell them what you think of it. Tell them what you think of them. I think there should be primaries against them. And, I don't know how else to say it other than these guys are our enemy. Because they're wolves in sheep's clothing. It's one thing, like every single Republican voted against the minimum wage increase. Every single one. Okay? Not a single one voted for it. So there is no populist right my ass cheeks in Washington, D.C. Are you kidding me? Simply doesn't. Even Josh Hawley was against a $15 minimum wage increase. So he also, to an extent, is a wolf in sheep's clothing because he pretends every now and then to be populist and to care about working people. Utter nonsense. He doesn't care at all about working people. But with 99% of the Republicans, they're a wolf in wolf's clothing. With the Democrats, so many of them, the ones who tweeted support for $15 minimum wage and then were against it, they are a wolf in sheep's clothing because they pretend like they're your friend. They pat you on the back and say, oh yeah, I'm with you. I'm fighting for you. I'm for working people. I'm a Democrat. Do you see the D next to my name? And they're not your ally. They're not. And so they should never live this down. They should absolutely be primaried. They should be defeated. Their voice mailboxes should be full of people who are telling them that they're gigantic pieces of shit. They should be ratioed relentlessly where everybody tells them what they think of what they just did. I mean, they just doomed so many people to live in poverty. They just took a pro-wage slavery vote. I don't consider this issue a debatable issue. I really don't. I really don't. And all the objections, it's just corporate propaganda. This idea of like, it would lead to mass unemployment if we were to raise the minimum wage to $50 an hour. Really? Well, Australia has effectively the equivalent of a $15 an hour minimum wage, right in that ballpark. And guess what? If anything, it's a little more. And guess what? There isn't some sort of hellscape unemployment crisis over there. A lot of Scandinavian countries.
All right, I'm going to call this one at Scandinavian countries and then start some commentary. So I agree with a lot of the points. So Kyle did come out to the same place I did on that they're just lying. They're lying. Great. Yeah, we knew that. However, what are his solutions? Well, it's a two-stage plan. Step one, we start with Twitter ratios. Oh no, angry voicemails, and primaries. That's step one. Then step two is we become more like the Scandinavian countries, which are still part of the global capitalist imperialist system that are connected through investments, stock markets, all of which rely on the military violence of the United States. Primarily is the military muscle of the global imperialist apparatus. It's part of why conditions are deliberately kept so bad here in the first place, so that there's an economic draft just constantly feeding poor people into the U.S. armed forces to be deployed in any of the half a dozen wars that are always now going on at any given time, constantly. That's his solution. Step one, Twitter ratios, voicemails, write your congressman, and primaries. What's the implication of a primary? Get a better Democrat. Get a better Democrat in there. Well, in the next video, we're going to look at some of the better Democrats. Who's one of the better Democrats? AOC, Bernie. It's like that whole thing is we got to get progressives in there. Well, the progressives we have gotten in there, or I say we, but I didn't actually vote for them. What are they doing? They're mainly providing left cover for the shitty imperialist Democrats. They're just a new mask for imperialism. That's the Democratic Party until you work outside of that party. And even then, you have to be careful. But until you work outside of that party in an independent left Labor Party that is avowedly socialist, doesn't take corporate money, is actively engaged in resisting and opposing capital, and really organizing for revolutionary change, you're trapped in this cycle of false hope, dependence, and just looking for its fantasy. You're looking for things that aren't going to happen. We must decouple from the Democratic Party because it is part of the imperialist structure that we are claiming to oppose. You can't do this boring from within thing. I mean, empirically, it is not working. So let's get on to that second video.
Kshama Sawant is an elected official. She's a socialist. I believe she's in Seattle. She was elected in Seattle. Probably, I think it's fair to say, one of the furthest left, if not the furthest left, elected official in the country. She's a really fascinating character, really, really interesting. She went on the Bad Faith podcast with Virgil and Bree, friends of the show, and they were talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the strategy that they've employed, the strategy that's been employed by the furthest left Congress people in D.C. So let's see what she has to say, and then we'll respond.
Remember what they were saying when we were arguing that when a section of the left was saying, yes, absolutely, there is an opportunity instead of just voting for Pelosi as speaker, actually the squad should withhold the vote and use it as a moment to build real pressure for Medicare for all. But what we said, and at least what Socialist Alternative said, was that it's not just as some sort of drama, or sort of meaningless political theater, but to actually use the force the vote tactic in the context of helping to build mass rallies and conferences around Medicare for all. But at that time, AOC and also sections of DSA, they said that, well, this is not the moment to use your political capital. And in fact, I remember AOC in her response to force the vote, and I think she genuinely meant this. She said, instead of this, we should fight for something winnable, which is $15 an hour. Well, here we are talking about $15 an hour. And again, Biden, Harris, Schumer, Pelosi, all the stalwarts, big business stalwarts of the party are throwing excuse after excuse. It's the parliamentarian, it's the rules, it's the decorum, it's Joe Manchin. So I think what we have to point to is sort of the endless logic of making excuses for the Democratic establishment. So today it's this excuse, tomorrow it's another excuse. Yesterday it was Medicare for all, today it's $15 an hour. This is a failed strategy. I think that's what we need to point out. It's not so much about whether AOC is genuine or not. The question is the strategy of not being willing to go into open combat against the establishment, is that working or not? And it's clearly not working.
She gets it. She gets it. That's the exact criticism that I've been attempting to make for an extended period of time here, but haven't been able to do it in such a succinct way. The question is not about whether or not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is genuine, or Pramila Jayapal, or Mark Pocan, or Mondaire Jones, or Jamal Bowman, or Ilhan Omar, or Rashida Tlaib.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here real quick. This is a shorter clip, so I think we're going to hear out Kyle to the end. I think it does become a question of whether they're genuine when we start asking why they don't go into that open combat. I mean, that's what they promised when they ran. They haven't done it. Why haven't they done it? There are numerous videos of AOC in particular, before she got elected, expressing, the very clear logic of going into that open combat. And you just have to do it, even if, you result in, the result is you're just a two-year, one-term congressperson. You just have to throw yourself in there, make the change, and hey, if, the establishment comes back after you, then we'll just elect somebody else. But we gotta, it's war, That's basically what she said, bring the ruckus and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. That's why people fucking voted for her in the first place, at least a lot of people. Kshama Sawant, is affiliated with Socialist Alternative. They are a Trotskyist group. I'm open to some... Trotsky did a lot of good things in his life. I'm not so big on Trotskyism, per se. That's a conversation for another day. Anyway, she does get it. Kyle is right there. Although, is that the strategy that he's been saying all along? Okay, fine. He wants open combat, but he's talking to a wall in terms of asking for people within the Democratic Party to fucking do that. They're not going to do it. And we've seen that time and time again. So let's see what else he thinks.
Or Ro Khanna. You go down the list. The question is not whether or not they're genuine. The question isn't even whether or not they're corrupt. The question is your strategy working? And the answer is no. And Kshama Sawant points out correctly, there's only one option left. And the option is to go into open combat against the establishment of both parties. That's the only option that's left. Now, they haven't done that. And I can tell you, as somebody who was a co-founder of Justice Democrats, that was the idea. They needed to get in there and go into open combat against the establishment of both parties. They're not doing that. They go into open combat against the Republicans, but they play patty cakes and try to go along to get along with the Democratic establishment. That didn't work, and that's never going to work. If that was going to work, well, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said it. She was like, Kshama Sawant points this out. Oh, don't do force the vote over Medicare for all. Do it over something that's, more likely to pass, like $15 minimum wage. We just had the option where you could have done it over $15 minimum wage and you didn't do it. So do you see the game that's being played on these people?
Okay, so here again is where Kyle is wrong. The game is not being played on AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ro Khanna. The game is being played by them on Kyle and anyone else who believes that these people... Again, it's like he looked at the point and just stepped around it. Like I said, the question you have to ask, well, it does become, are they genuine? Are they corrupt? I feel like that's kind of the same question, actually. When they're not doing the thing that they campaigned on, when they're not doing the thing that this Justice Democrats group that he helped co-found was set up to do, to get better Democrats, to primary, quote, establishment, boomer Democrats, whatever, and to get, new progressive blood in there. And then you get the new progressive blood and they behave just like the boomercrats. There's no difference. And it's not because they're keeping their powder dry. I mean, if you believe that, why don't you believe Nancy Pelosi when she says she's keeping her powder dry against Mitch McConnell? Which of course leads to the endless jokes about the infinite stockroom of powder that they're just keeping dry and never using. AOC is saying the same fucking thing and you're falling for it. Kyle and everybody else who believes in the we need better Democrats strategy. I get that building outside of against all that money and trying to build up a labor political party. I get the challenges, but you are being outright played if you are buying into, well, let's look at the $15 an hour thing. So AOC said, we're going to keep our powder dry on Medicare for all, and we're not going to do force the vote. We're going to keep our powder dry for $15. And then she just didn't do it. That's literally exactly what the boomercrats do on everything else. Why do you believe it when AOC says it? It makes no sense. This whole working within the Democratic Party thing isn't going to work. Listen to the Socialist. She has it right.
The game is they always, oh my God, there's always an excuse. There's always something. Oh, we don't have the numbers. Or, oh, the parliamentarian said we can't do that. And so you're not supposed to follow the logic that the establishment is feeding you on every single issue. No, there are some times where you have to draw a line in the sand and fight. Now, here's the thing, guys. These people are scared. I mean, that's really the reality of the situation. They are scared. They do not want to have all of mainstream media rain down holy hell on them and treat them like the enemy and demonize them and vilify them. They don't want that. They don't want the leaders of their own parties to take retribution and revenge against them.
All right, so here Kyle is running cover for the fear that they are claiming. And I have to take issue with this line of their own party will come down on them. You cannot both claim to be an insurgent candidate and say that you're afraid that, quote, your own party is going to turn on you. Are you an insurgent or aren't you? Are you a revolutionary like Bernie Sanders said he was, or aren't you? Are you going to be this, table-flipping, rabble-rousing rebel? Or are you going to cling to Joe Biden's leg like a frightened child? You cannot do both. And here, Kyle is running cover for them. Oh, look, they're just human. They're just afraid like we are. They don't want Nancy Pelosi to make her life hard. Fucking AOC said at the beginning of her term, she's like, I don't care. Bring it on. I'm here to fight. Boom. They're going to come at me, and I'm ready for it. And then, hey, I guess that $175,000 a year she's getting paid as a congresswoman beats the bartending money. I'm sure it does. I'm sure there's a million people in her ear like, Senate, president in 15 years. Whatever it is. Assuming that this whole thing wasn't just a ploy in the first place. And I'm not ruling that out by any means. Forget bourgeois political parties. Forget them. These are the results. But again, Kyle Kulinski, I don't watch secular talk for my own personal edification, is, although we can agree that we need some change, he, in the end, stumps for capitalism, specifically welfare capitalism, social democracy, which is still imperialism, still relies on the same system. And you just can't really move away from it. The only reason we got the golden age of social democracy, the New Deal from the 1930s to the 1970s, technically there are still vestiges of it, but they're severely decayed. We only got that as a response to the existence of the USSR and a rising labor movement. A faction of the U.S. ruling class, the FDR faction, was threatened by that, and their strategy was not just mere crackdown, but concessions making. They tried to make a class peace. Well, that's not the mood of the ruling class right now. The ruling class right now, I mean, you saw the way they handled Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was a viable option if they had wanted to go the New Deal route. If they had wanted to go the social democratic route, they had a willing vessel in Bernie Sanders to do that, make class peace, avoid socialist revolution or just more instability. And, you know, it was cut and dried. It was, you know, wrapped up with a bow. They treated Bernie Sanders like shit. It's not just because they feared he was going to go too far. There may have been a little of that. They don't feel like they need to go there. They're feeling cocky, and they're like, no, let it ride. We talked about this before. Their attitude actually seems to be more like, let's just unleash chaos, and, you know, probably we'll keep being billionaires. Their strategy is leaning more towards neo-fascism than it is more of a class peace social democracy thing. They want terror. They want more chaos because they believe that they can stay above the fray while the working class sinks into misery, which will only benefit them. So that seems to be their mood. Meanwhile, we've got people who are half awake, like Kyle Kulinski, you know, standing at the slot machine of Democratic primaries, just feeding quarter after quarter after quarter into it, pulling that lever like, oh, it's going to be different this time. Oh, it's going to be different this time. It's not. Step away from the machine. You're losing time. You're losing resources. Get off the Democratic crack pipe. It's not going to work, even for social democracy. Let's continue.
I don't want that. But it's the only way you're ever going to win and get anything done. And I got news for you. The media hates you anyway. The leaders of your own party hate you anyway. They despise you. They despise you. So who cares if they, you know, kick it up a few levels? Who cares? You might care, but I don't care that you care. I really don't give a shit about your feelings. I don't care. You were sent there to do a job, to fight for the American people, to fight for working people, to fight for Medicare for all and free college and a living wage and ending the wars and a Green New Deal, and the list goes on and on. You know, universal daycare, paid time off. You're supposed to be fighting for these things. You're only going to get them if you fight. So, you know, listen, they're pathetic. They're pathetic. They're pathetic. And I don't want to hear, like, I just saw Pramila Jayapal in an interview singing the praises of this COVID relief bill. You're supposed to be the left flank of the Democratic Party. What you should be talking about is the failure of not getting the $15 minimum wage in there and the $1,400 checks not being $2,000 checks. These aren't small things. These are big things. Think about how many people's lives were ruined because there wasn't a $15 minimum wage in there. Over 1 million people. More than 1 million people. Over 1 million people would have been lifted out of poverty, official poverty, with the $15 minimum wage, and something like 27 million people would have been helped. And we're just going to sing the praises of this bill when they promised $15 minimum wage and they didn't put it in there? Guys, what had to happen is those 23 or 24 Democrats who signed Ro Khanna's letter telling Kamala Harris and Joe Biden to overrule the parliamentarian, they should have voted as a block and said, we're going to vote no unless and until you put the $15 minimum wage in this bill. There are more of us who are saying we're not voting for it if it's not in there than people who are saying they're not going to vote for it if it is in there. So get to work, Joe. Get to work, Kamala. Give these people whatever they need to get on board for the $15 minimum wage. That was the only way we were going to get it. And yes, it would have been tough because the media would have smeared the progressives and Democratic leadership would have taken revenge against them. But that's when you keep using the bully pulpit. Why are you guys afraid?
All right. And again, I'm going to cut it at why are you guys afraid? Because I think Kyle's so close. I mean, he I think in many ways has the right attitude about the injustice of the situation. It's not right. I believe that he is being very genuine there about that. He and I shared this sense of injustice. The system is fucked. The outcomes are terrible. He and I might disagree on how the system exactly or the extent that it needs to be changed. I think we would agree on some of the ways, that it needs to be changed. I think it's largely a question of extent. But again, it's like he can't pry himself away from screaming at this wall that doesn't listen, that doesn't respond. Those Democrats don't care how long you question them. They don't care about getting ratioed on Twitter. They don't care. They serve another master. And so what I'm wondering here is what it's going to take for Kyle to finally accept that. And he has a big audience. Like I said, I think he's around 1 million or 900,000 subscribers. I wonder if some of it, is not wanting to lose that audience. I don't want to necessarily put that on him because I don't know. I don't know what his private thoughts are. And I haven't heard enough. I mean, sometimes you listen to these people, the bigger personalities, and you can smell grift. I don't know that I smell grift with him as much as I think I think he believes what he's saying, to be honest. And I think he is just barking up the wrong tree. And again, I don't think he's a dumb guy. So at what point does it really, finally hit home with him that this isn't going to change, that he is yelling at a wall that is not ever going to respond? And honestly, I'm curious, what is he going to do at that point? Because it could be telling for, that portion of the masses who do follow him, and it is a decently sized audience. And then they, of course, influence other family members and things like that. The other thing is, Kyle's a guy who is used to having people listen to him. This is another thing, even where money isn't involved, when it comes to, political personalities. They like being right. They like being heard. They like having a big audience. And, it's just something to be aware of. Not wanting to lose the audience for those reasons is also a real thing. But I know that he was, willing to abstain from endorsing Biden this time. At least that was the last time I checked in with him. The Democratic Party's a bust. Twitter ratios, calling your congressman and primarying them with new people who are going to do the exact same thing. It's not going to work. So what do we do? I think I'm going to call it here. I'm tempted to listen to the rest of this there's 5 more minutes, and I just don't know what he could possibly be talking about during those 5 minutes. Maybe we'll check it out. But what I want to say is, so what do we do? Well, first of all, we take the correct position, whether or not you think it's realistic, air quotes, at this point in time. If you're a socialist, don't advocate for social democracy. That would be number one. I've talked about supporting Bernie Sanders in this in the left wing of his coalition that would advocate for socialism. You use that platform to get on stage. Then when you have the mic, when it's your turn as part of the coalition, you say your piece. I am here as part of this overall movement, but I represent the socialist contingent within it. And if you want to work with us, we want X, Y, Z, and these are our ideas. And boom, you've just used that to gain a whole new audience to make your case. And that's how it grows. What we don't want to do is start watering it down to just mere social democracy and keeping up a front against that. I do believe in the power of discussion. It can't, necessarily perform miracles, but for talking to open-minded people who are living in reality, dealing with the same set of facts that you are, I do believe that people's political beliefs can convert. They can go left or they can go right. People can be influenced, and that's a process that remains open and changeable for many people throughout their entire lives. So, number one, we want to advocate for socialism, whether or not it's realistic. We don't want to be opportunistic. And, getting away in general from the Democratic Party at this point. If we have learned nothing else from Bernie Sanders, getting away from the Democratic Party is key. because you saw how much tremendous energy, and he ran his campaign right, and he didn't take the money, and it still wound up in the same place anyway. Well, let's cut it off, because if Bernie couldn't do it, I don't think anyone can. There was a lot of energy there, and it still didn't work. So we're then looking at something like a Green Party, a mass socialist party. There are also, Democratic centralist type groups that are more Marxist-Leninist. I don't think those are ever going to have broad appeal in the United States. I could be wrong, but it's just not a model I think that people are likely to follow. I don't think that those things are ever going to get big and turn into mass movements. Will they have some influence? Possibly, but it's not a mass party. Howie Hawkins has talked about this in the Green Party, how it's a mass party. It's designed for, and he in fact would like to turn it into a membership-based party. So you just pay a due, you're a member, and per month. And that, he has historical evidence that that has just been a more effective model at building kind of a labor party to the extent that you can build one at all. But I think that the real secret ingredient here, unfortunately, is something like lightning striking. You can build that lightning rod as high as you want. Ultimately, you still need the storm to come along. What is that? It's a confluence of events that's just a lot of people being in the right place at the right time, saying the right things with some of the right personalities, and boom, you get a spark, and then you can run with it. The Bernie moment was lightning striking after a long time. Can the Green Party get that? Well, I don't know. There was talk of, running the rock. I don't know if that's a great strategy, and it's really kind of outside the scope of what I'm even trying to consider in this video. But the point is, what people often say about third parties is they're kind of only viable on the really local level. I happen to agree with that, at least as of right now, outside of some lightning strike moment. It does seem to be possible to elect, say, a Green. We're not talking about libertarians because they're more capitalist than either Democrat or Republican. In fact, I would say they're crypto-fascist. But yeah, you can get a couple of Greens on your city council or something. What that isn't, though, is a mass movement. That's where the lightning strike needs to come into place. And it's hard. The United States is a huge country, over 300 million, well over 300 million people, huge geographically. It's hard to get, that lightning to strike where then you can relay that energy all over the country at the same time, because those are the moments that people out there in the non-participatory, air quotes, apathetic, we're not really apathetic masses, but we often get called that because we don't participate in what is obviously a sham. What, the thing that Kyle Kulinski is out here trying to sell us on, this dog and pony show of the squad and the Democratic Party. People see through that. They don't want to buy into it. They don't feel like suckers, and they don't want to do it. What does it take in the United States to get people involved? Because people on some level do care. They've built up big cynical calluses over it, but they do care at some level, want change, just are afraid of the ruling class, and for good reason. They're terrifying. And to quote my friend, fellow content creator, fellow traveler, a lot of people seem to feel like, as far as change goes, a meteor striking the earth or some other kind of, like apocalyptic type event is like more likely than a mass movement. That's how despairing people feel. Well, so how do you overcome that lightning strike moment? We saw that Bernie brought a lot of people out. We need it again, but we need it outside the Democratic Party, plain and simple. And really, absent that, we're going to be waiting. We need to keep doing general education. We need to keep our sanity. So I'm going to end on that note right now. I guess we'll do more Kyle Kulinski another time, perhaps. In fact, that probably will be a direction for the channel. I'd like to start doing more critiques of Humanist Report and, Jimmy Dore and these other people who have huge followings, because we want to engage the masses as socialists. This is a preview, I think, of what is required. Get people off the teat of the Better Democrat strategy or the other strategies that are out there. But in the meantime, while we wait for that next bolt of lightning to strike, And it can take many forms. We've got to be comradely to each other. We've got to stay sane. Yes, we've got to debate the ideas and debate harmful things that we see in the movement, whether it's ideas or behaviors, whatever it is. That's entirely our right to do that. But this is very much a plea for sanity while we're in the rut that we're in. Let's not wantonly take it out on each other and, engage in gang wars. That's really not going to help anyone or the movement. Doesn't get us any closer to socialism. On that note, I'm going to wrap it up. Please leave comments below, and I will probably break out the Kyle Kulinski critique into a separate video just for people who want to see that. So if you see that, it'll be redundant. But thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next one. And that's the video. Thanks to our current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen or just support us financially, you can go to patreon.com/socialismforall and sign up for a monthly donation. You can also follow us at facebook.com/socialism4all. Used to have a page at FOR all, and it got throttled to death by Zuck. Here on YouTube, please click the like button, subscribe button, and the notifications bell. Please leave a comment if you can, and please share our video wherever you're online, your Twitter feed, your Discord servers, Reddit subs, etc. All of that helps more people to see this content, whether it's in the YouTube algorithm or just posting it on other sites. All of that's helpful. All of you out there supporting and promoting this content makes it all go that much more smoothly. We need to end capitalism, normalize talking about socialism today, and it's really kind of our only hope for a better tomorrow. Thanks for all you do, and we will catch you in the next video.